Hey everybody, welcome back to the Drinkers and Thinkers podcast. I'm Dan, and I'll be taking you through the next 60 minutes of content. Now, if you didn't hear episode 1, I already have a few corrections to make. Firstly, in episode 1, I laughingly said that I'd be taking you through 30 to 40 minutes of content. That obviously turned out not to be the case, so it is going to be a 60-minute podcast. I'm a long-winded bastard, and there's nothing I can do about that. So 60 minutes from here on out, so maybe it's best if you listen to this podcast in small doses, much the way people prefer me in real life. The second thing I want to talk about is the news segment, which I, in the first episode, did live, sort of. I did it in one sitting, going through a news feed. That was a terrible idea. It does not result in the best content and is grueling for me and probably for the audience as well. So I'm going to change my tactic a little bit. Every day, obviously, I open up my browser and go through various news sites and whatnot. I'm just going to keep the microphone close. When I see something that catches my attention, I'm going to hit record and just start spewing. So that's how the news is going to work from now on. One sitting was just not going to do it. It was excruciating for me, probably more excruciating for you, and that's that. Now, moving forward, today on the show, we have Jovan Richards, who is a Democratic analyst and operative and radio host, and he's going to talk about the state of the Democratic Party now and moving forward. In the coming weeks, we have some other great guests, including Anthony Pellegrino, a member of the Libertarian Party. We have Melanie Dorigo, who's running for Congress in New York's 3rd District in a primary against an incumbent Democrat. Also, and if this is the one thing I could really impress upon you, I have an email address for the show, and I didn't mention it in the last episode, so I'm going to mention it now and from now on. The Drinkers and Thinkers, all spelled out, no spaces, thedrinkersandthinkers@gmail.com. So feel free to reach out with questions or comments or death threats, whatever you want. thedrinkersandthinkers@gmail.com. And again, this is episode 2, so if you're listening to the podcast for the first time, and you're listening to episode 2, well, you're a monster. Stop. Go listen to episode 1 first, then listen to this one, and then subscribe and listen to all of them. Okay, well, this week's introduction is a lot shorter, mercifully for everyone, so we're going to get right into the news. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the fun. All right, let's see. We have Sweden in the news. Corona. I swore I wouldn't do any more Corona. Last week I said that. I did. Okay, just a little bit of Corona. A little bit of Corona can't kill you. I read that on Facebook, so I believe it. All right, we'll do this quickly. So Sweden, let's see. Sweden's death toll has passed 3,000 now. That's a low number. That's a low number. So Sweden has become sort of the poster child, probably reluctantly so, for Americans who are very adamantly opposed to the more stringent procedures that a lot of states have taken. These shutdowns, these lockdowns. Sweden has not done that. They haven't mandated, shutting everything down and shutting down restaurants and whatnot. So they've become sort of the poster child for people. And for a while, it seemed like the news is good. And a death toll of 3,000 in Sweden versus a death toll of 70,000 in America seems, on face value, like, it's a no-brainer. But there's a lot more going on here, so we'll get into it just real quick. First of all, the two populations are very different. Your average Swede is more educated than your average American. When you ask, and here's the thing, Sweden is not doing nothing in the face of this. They're just taking a more relaxed approach from a governmental standpoint. But they're still giving out the same guidelines for social distancing, for masks, for, keeping people away. Swedes more earnestly are willing to do what they're being asked to do. They're willing to be cautious. They're willing to follow guidelines. They're not throwing a temper tantrum the way Americans tend to do when you ask them to do anything that might inconvenience them. That's number one. Number two, again, the differences in the two different types of people. Americans and Swedes are very different. So you're working in a country that has a very different baseline health than your average American. Your average Swede is much healthier than your average American. A lot of that, we won't get into the healthcare systems, but suffice to say that they have a much better preventative healthcare system. They prevent a lot of illness, whereas Americans, we wait until we're ill to get health care. And obviously in the American system, for some of us, it's not an option to have primary preventative care. A lot of people who can't afford health insurance have to wait until it's dire. So those are very different circumstances as well when you're trying to compare Sweden and the United States. But finally, the thing that, I think really needs to be hammered home is the context of these numbers. 3,000 dead in Sweden is an awful low number when you look at other countries, how hard they've been hit. But when you think about it for a moment, and I'm doing math now as I'm talking, if you take 3,000, their death toll, you have to account for the size of the population, which I'm estimating, I think is about 8 million people in Sweden. Let me see. Okay, the article says 10 million people. So Sweden is a country of 10 million people. They have 3,000 dead. That seems just fine. If your argument is, open the economy and let's not go broke, that seems fine. But the United States is 34 times as large as Sweden then. If their population is 10 million, ours is 340 million, that's 34 times as large a country. So if you're going to look at their death toll, if you're going to look at that number, that 3,000, you then have to multiply it by the population differential of 34. And when you do that, if their method was super effective, you should arrive at a number lower than our death toll. And even if you could arrive at a number that is the same, then at least you could make the argument, well, see, it really doesn't matter what we do, so why are we all going broke? But, of course, having just scratched out the math, spoiler alert, you arrive at a number that is much higher. You arrive at a number over 100,000 dead if you take the Swedish model, the Swedish death toll, and factor in the population differential. You arrive at 102,000 and change. That's easily 30,000 more people dead. So I'm not sure what the argument is. It's not working better. You may like their approach better, but the results are not better. Maybe they're better for Sweden, and that's for Sweden to decide. But, 70,000 people dead is unacceptable in a modern society. It shouldn't have gotten to that point to begin with, and there were a lot of reasons it did. But to say, what's another 30,000 on top of that, let's open the economy back up, I don't get the logic. And look, I'll be the first one to say, what I just did was, I was playing fast and loose with statistics. Statistics is a science, and I just kind of screwed the science a little bit, because correlation is the mother of all fuck-ups in this sort of argument. You can't correlate certain things, and it doesn't just work like that, where you take a number and then multiply it by another number and aha, I'm right. It does establish a baseline for the argument that no, they're not doing any better than we are. In fact, based on per capita death, they're doing worse. But there's a lot of factors there, and I don't want to play fast and loose with mathematics. But here's the thing. The people that are making these arguments for just open up the economy and let's just see what happens are working off of pseudoscience and fictions from the internet. So if they're going to use shit science, then you know what? I have no problem fudging the statistics a little bit, and it's making the point. The point is still correct. Numbers largely don't lie. So I'm over Sweden. I wish them well, but I don't want to hear any more about Sweden from rednecks, honestly. Find it on a map, and then I'll be impressed. Let's do that as a contest. Find it on a map. How about that? Good Lord. All right, let's move on. No more Corona. No more Corona. This podcast now has the antibodies. Well, look at this. Apparently, there's a commission out of the Vatican on whether or not to allow female deacons. Now, this is a question that has been being raised for a very long time. But there's finally a commission in the Vatican. Well, I applaud the Vatican for joining the ranks of the 21st century, I suppose, pending their decision, of course. Folks, I'm not going to get held up on this for a whole hour, although I probably could for several hours. I'm not going to go off the deep end on this, although I have a lot to say about this organization and the ones like it. But I will say this. Right now, there is a robust, contentious, and at times nasty internal debate going on inside an organization as to whether or not to allow women in the workplace. This from an organization that for centuries has had no such debate over whether or not to allow pedophiles in the workplace. There seems to be more contention over the issue of women, in fact, an issue that has only recently been raised, whereas the other side has been at work in the church for centuries. The pedophiles have run loose in the church for centuries and have had no such debate. So, God's love may be infinite, but so too is the sheer hubris of this organization, the greed of this organization. All this in his name? You are either the Church of Christ or you are not. And I think it's time for you to decide. Because if you are, then it's time to drop the pretense, take off the silly dresses, and embrace his message. If you are not, that's fine. Then admit it, rip the Band-Aid off, and then you will be seen for what you truly are, and that is a cult. I have no empathy, no patience for this type of hypocrisy exhibited by this organization and all the ones like it. They are not immune. The American Protestant church is rife with pedophiles and con men and liars and charlatans, and we should call them what they are. I'm not going to get hung up on this. I'm really not. Most of this, the church's recent history with pedophiles at least, is now out there in the public domain, as the states and counties that have protected these organizations for decades no longer can protect them. So great is the outrage from certain quarters. So it's all out there for us to see, for us to read, and for us to judge for ourselves how we feel about these organizations. A debate on whether or not to allow women to serve in the workplace. Now, I shouldn't say that, to allow women to work in the workplace, because the Catholic Church has always embraced free labor from women. They call them nuns, and they are a second-class citizen in the church. They serve the church. So the debate does not seem whether or not women should be allowed to serve the church, but whether or not they should be in positions of authority in the church, have positions of influence in the church. So, I'm going to stop right there. I will not apologize if I've offended you. I recognize that I have probably offended some people. That's it. I'm done. Moving on. My guest today is Jovan C Richards. Now, this is sort of a returning of the favor, because Jovan is a radio host, and I have been a guest on his show numerous times. So hopefully this is the start of returning that favor. Jovan can be heard on numerous radio stations throughout Westchester and the greater New York area, and has been featured in publications there as well. Currently, he's the Media and Government Relations Manager for the New York State Society of CPAs. He is the Executive Vice President for the New York State Young Democrats, although apparently they use the term young fairly loosely. He was the inaugural Diversity and Inclusion Committee Chairman for the Young Democrats of America, and he's also the vice president of Operation Prom National Network. If you don't know what Operation Prom is, it's a fantastic organization doing good work. You can find them at operationprom.org, and it's worthwhile to check out the site and contribute if you're able. So I'm happy that all of these things and our history together allow me to welcome to the show Jovan C Richards. Hey, Jovan, how are you?
Hey Dan, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate you joining me on this new endeavor.
Oh, listen, I mean, you've always joined me every time I did a radio show, and I've jumped from station to station, from online publication to online publication, and you've always been a constant voice on most of the shows that I've done. So I'm excited to return the favor.
Yeah, it's been fun. We do have a history of this, you and I, but this is a sort of role reversal. This
it
is a role reversal.
it is, and I can only hope that I will go off the deep end as you have on mine. So be prepared.
Well, let's get started then.
Awesome.
We're here to talk about the Democratic Party, and I want to do this sort of outside of the context of Donald Trump and your
That's hard.
opponents and all that.
That's hard.
Yeah, but I think there's a method to that madness
Okay.
because you guys obviously this is a party that's going to have to sort of stand up on its own long after Trump. Um, so the first question, and this is just diving right in, is there a struggle for the soul of the Democratic Party right now?
So to answer that question, I think it's more of a, I think you should ask more of a broad question, and it's not me trying to switch the roles again, but this is just me simply saying I think the country is trying to define its soul right now, and I think a large portion of the country does not agree that the soul belongs to any one particular man in the White House, um, because let's also remember 2016, although Hillary Clinton did not win the um, election by the Electoral College, she won by over 3 million votes in the popular vote. So clearly, Americans from all corners of this nation believe in a democratic principle or the democratic way, or some have some inkling that they don't want Donald Trump being their president. But going back to, I guess, the original question, I think the Democratic Party is will always continue to find itself. And here's why I say that. We are the party of inclusion and diversity. And when you invite everyone to the table, you invite everyone's ideals, you invite everyone's ideas, their beliefs, their principles. And when you have so many principles and so many ideas and so much so many cooks in the kitchen, if you will, the the one person that you answer to, who is to kind of keep the kitchen theme or kitchen analogy going, you don't really have the one chef. You have all cooks, and each cook is trying to be the chef. um
Well, isn't it generally accepted that that's not a great thing?
yes, normally correct, but in a world where, or in a kitchen, in a kitchen we where diversity thrives, it's best to have leaders. And we do have leaders in the Democratic Party, and I want to emphasize that we have amazing leaders in the Democratic Party, some of which are thriving and some of which are doing great and wonderful things to help Democrats progress and grow and become a stronger united party. But in going back to the kitchen idea or analogy, you have that chef, and everyone answers to him, everyone. And then you have executive sous chefs, and then you have your regular cooks, and everyone has a job.
Sure.
And
I want to pick up on something you
yeah,
said.
yeah,
I was going to try and avoid contentious questions, but I definitely want to ask this question. You're describing it as the party of diversity and, everyone's welcome. In fairness, at what point in the last few decades do you think that it's fair to say that? In other words, at what point did you become the party of diversity and welcoming to everyone and everyone's causes? Because that certainly wasn't always the case.
I mean, if you want to go back into the times of Andrew Jackson, you can make the argument that Democrats were what you would consider what you would consider modern day Republicans.
And that's fair, and I'm leaving that out. I'm thinking more that, sort of the Democrats pivoted to a very different message in the '60s, but I'm talking about more recent history. I mean,
I
do you
think
think that
I think once
the Democrats of
Democrats
the '90s were friendly to the gay community, were friendly to diverse points of view?
so that's such a hard question because at one point I think both political parties, were oblivious to um, changing times. But I think the Democrats have been more inviting and have been more welcoming to the societal changes as we've progressed.
It
Um,
also helps that your opponent party has seemed to regress in a lot of those areas.
yes, absolutely. I mean, if you but look at the Democratic Party in let's kind of narrow the Democratic Party into New York standards, right? New York has Democrats in the assembly, in the right now Democrats run the assembly and they also run the Senate, as well as the executive branches. And in those pockets, you see a quite a bit of diversity. New York elected its first woman of color to a statewide position in Tish James. The two leading legislators. The Speaker of the Assembly is a black man from the Bronx, and the Senate Pro Tem is a black woman from Yonkers. So you're seeing
I want to
diversity portray. You're seeing the Democratic Party at its most diverse point. And I think that's partially why people are welcome because they see themselves in the leaders that we put forth as a party. But to answer your
and
original
that's
question,
wait,
yep.
that's admirable, but I have to say that the optics of it are great, but life is not changing for the average New Yorker. Specifically, life is not changing for your average poor New Yorker. If you were poor under Republicans or you were poor under George W. Bush, you're still poor now. I mean, are we really lifting anyone out of poverty, or is this really just business as usual with a different coat of paint, as it were?
I mean, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think there has been a lot of progression and a lot of programs that have been designed to ensure that Americans at every level have some sort of access to basic needs.
Right, but isn't that just making it easier to be poor? It's not fixing the underlying issues.
I mean, you to fix I mean, you have to fix everything's a building block, right? If I can get the population that is less fortunate to be sheltered and get them food and show them that the government and the country cares about them, that's step one, and let's build upon that from there. I mean, listen, we have a insanely harsh and high number of homeless individuals and unfortunately homeless veterans, and I think that's something that we need to fix. But that's a country thing, and I think Democrats will take the lead at this venture and kind of make sure that um, our communities of color and our veteran communities and our our homeless communities are well taken care of, and that they have what they need to survive to become um, the more thriving members of society. But I definitely want to go back to answer your previous question. Um, when did we see a shift? I think we saw the shift when Democratic leaders uh, invited their harshest critics in. Um, I think we saw a shift when Shirley Chisholm ran for um, ran for Congress and won. She ran. I think you saw a shift when she ran for president, and became one of the most popular women of color in politics. I think you saw the shift when Martin Luther King met with Lyndon Johnson and JFK. I think you saw a shift when Democrats were saying there is a path for legalization, or there's a path to be an American citizen. I think you see a culture where Democrats have more than once, more than twice, more than three times, have invited people of different backgrounds and different orientations than themselves to be a part of to be a part of a greater conversation, and that is how we move our society forward. And I think that's why people they feel so comfortable becoming a Democrat. And I think the opposition um, has shunned the possibility of these individuals away and said, you know what, we don't want them anyway. Where the Democrats have said, you know what, fine, we do want them. It's not, oh, we'll take them. It's no, we want you to join our party. We want you to understand that we're going to fight for you, and we want you to be a part of this big melting pot that
I,
is
I,
America.
that is admirable, and I eagerly await them starting to do that and fight for people. I want to backtrack real fast
Yeah.
and look backwards at the 2018, the blue wave, as it were.
Mm.
Um, I'm going to give you my thoughts on the three things that contributed to that success, and if
Sure.
you could comment on each and rank them in importance. The first issue is undeniably the Trump backlash. You've got an incredibly unpopular
Absolutely.
president. That certainly contributed. The second would be the new voices in the party, the people that you just described, the people of color who are joining the party, really, sort of for the first time, front and center. And then the third would be their platform and message. Comment on each and rank them in importance for me.
Okay, so I think I think you've asked a very tough question, and let me explain why. I think each category that you've explained has equal value to the others. But
Okay.
if you're asking me to rank them in order of importance, here's how I would put it. First is platform. I think actually, you know what? I'm gonna rearrange that. I think first and foremost has to be the Trump backlash. I, as an avid Democrat, and Dan, you know this because you and I have been
You are
friends.
avid.
You and I have been friends for years, and we've had these political conversations, uh, running on almost a decade now.
Yep.
Um, Geez, we're getting old.
Yes,
But
we
like,
are.
I'm
Well,
pushing 30,
me,
man. This is
me,
crazy.
me, much faster.
But the backlash. I've never seen Democrats in my entire Democratic career get as fired up, and we're talking more fired up than when we had Barack Obama when the nomination back in '08. I'm seeing Democrats getting fired up and excited and ready, and you saw just a glimmer of that in 2018. Just a glimmer of what the blue wave can be, and you saw it locally in a stronger fashion in 2017. I mean, kind of bringing things home. I honestly think the blue wave really started locally in 2017. Westchester, the golden apple, as they say.
Hmm.
You saw George Latimer win a great election from a Trump Republican, right? This Rob Astorino was the definition of a Trump Republican because he literally was on the campaign, as he is still right now on Trump's campaign as he's running for state senate in the 40th district against my good friend Pete Harcum, who is gonna do wonders, and I'm really excited for that race because I know Pete's gonna do great. But you saw the blue wave really start in 2017, and a lot of that had to do with the backlash of Trump being elected. Democrats felt defeated, and I'll honestly tell you, the month of November was of 2016 was one of the hardest years for me personally, because we've done all this work, we've listened to the data, we've looked through the magnifying glass in an attempt to try to kind of create this persona that Hillary Clinton is going to be the next president and she's going to be great and she's going to have this and she's going to do that. And there was no lie about it. Hillary Clinton would have made an excellent president, a phenomenal president. But we underestimated the opponent in this category, in this situation, and we did it early and we did it frequently and we did it for far too long. We thought Trump was going to be a joke. I mean, I personally remember laughing when the Fox News debate, the Fox primary debate with the Republican Party in 2016, and Trump was standing next to Jeb Bush, and I was like, "What is this? Like, this can't be. Why is he center? Is he really polling second?" And to know the next debate he polled first, and Jeb is in a corner somewhere when everyone thought Jeb Bush was going to be the one. So I think honestly, I think no one fires up Democrats better than Donald Trump. And I think we have found a way to be unified and to really center ourselves uh, in the midst of his lack of leadership, because we can't even call it leadership because the man doesn't have a leadership bone in his body. Um, the second is, I think, platform. And I'm going to kind of mesh the second and third because I think the platform was, I think, a more progressive and aggressive platform was brought by new people. So I'm going to
Okay.
say the new people and the platform. You're seeing, but to say that is kind of backwards because a lot of this started from a very old old school Democrat or new school Democrat who just happens to be of the older generation.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Bernie Sanders.
Substantially older.
Yes, but Bernie Sanders has been fighting for these same rules and legislation for his entire life. I mean, you saw it when he was mayor of a Vermont town. He was fighting for it when he was a Congress member representing Vermont, and you see it as the junior senator from Vermont.
Right.
Also,
I mean, I've always said I don't agree with a lot of Bernie Sanders' platform, but I have tremendous respect for his conviction of belief, which is absent from most politics.
absolutely,
And
absolutely, I agree.
I want to pick up on that for a second. And this is something. It's great to have new and young voices in the party, which we're seeing more and more. But this is something that has bothered me for a while now. With all of the youth in the party, with all of this intellectual brilliance and these bright young stars, why is it that the Democratic Party keeps running candidates who need to apologize for being racist, being anti LGBTQ? I'm talking obviously cases like Ralph Northam, who I don't think has any business holding public office. But I'm talking about the Clintons. I'm talking about Biden, Bloomberg. It just seems that there's this older generation that refuses to relinquish, and the Democrats allow them to get away. I mean, you just sang the virtues of Hillary Clinton. Why can't we just find candidates who don't have to apologize for their backgrounds?
I think the political game or the political life, political career is a very tough career to go down. It's a tough career path
Is it
because
tough not to dress up in blackface or gay bash?
so absolutely that is not tough at all. Let me unequivocally say that is not tough at all. These mistakes have and should have cost a lot of people their
And I
positions.
think, in fairness, I think the blackface thing is obvious to everyone, even though Ralph Northam is still the governor. But the gay bashing, on the other hand, was institutional in the Democratic Party. I mean, it was the Clintons that gave us the Defense of Marriage Act and banned gays from the military, and they hung on to that line for a very long time. And even Barack Obama ran on traditional marriage. His own vice president had to out him on Meet the Press. So why can't we find younger candidates who don't have to apologize for being bigots or endorsing destructive
I think
policies?
we found the younger candidates. I think when you this is so I'm gonna
Yeah, but I'm looking
coming
at Schumer, Pelosi. I'm looking at the power center of the Democratic Party.
of
Is
course.
still this old guard of frankly bigots and corporatists, isn't it?
So as the executive vice president of the New York State Young Democrats, I always fluctuate with this dilemma, this calling, because in my role in my life, I I like to enhance and like to push Democrats and younger Democrats to run in political races and be a stronger, solid, more unified voice in the political circles. And that's, pushing candidates to run. That's recruiting candidates to be a part of something bigger than just themselves. Um, you're seeing
Is it also you guys though actively rejecting the Schumers and the Clintons of the
I don't.
world?
So and this is where I fluctuate, right? Because as me personally, right now I'm looking at a couple different races, right? I'm looking at and I'm right now. I'll give you two. The two congressional races in Westchester. The one really big one is over in the Westchester Rockland area for Nita Lowey's old seat, and I'm looking at younger representation there that can thrive in a great congressional
Right. I
district.
mean, she has parked on that seat for
She has,
decades,
and
hasn't she?
and if it wasn't for Mondaire Jones early on giving her a hell of a run, she probably would have ran another term. But she saw the writing on the wall. She saw the progressive writing on the wall, and her brother had just died, so like there's a lot going on
I
there,
mean,
and she.
is that? I guess I'm getting to the same issue, but is that healthy to have someone in your party basically decomposing in a seat? I mean,
I don't think it's
the average age is appalling in
if they still
Congress.
listen, if they still have their wits and they're representing the need of the people, I'm perfectly fine with it. However, if they are literally there for the 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 gravitas and the showmanship
And
of
the
the job,
bump in personal net worth.
exactly, then I'm not okay with it.
Fair enough.
honestly think that there's a fair balance between young people getting involved and having some of the old guard still there to show them some of the ropes. Now, young people are there to break rules and to break norms and to break barriers and to change how we do things. But the old guard is still there to show them some tricks that the new guard has yet to see. Because even though a lot of us young individuals have jobs as chief of staffs and legislative directors and being a part of, old guards uh posse, if you will, or legislative staff, there's still things that we don't see as staff that the electeds do. So I think there's a necessity for new and old to come together. I think bringing someone like a Pelosi and an AOC and putting them in the same room and saying, this is what the young people want. What are you guys willing to, work with? The Democratic Party right now is in a battle with itself a lot of times, and you're noticing that more this year than
Right.
ever. Especially when you had the 16 person Democratic,
Oh
or
God.
I think it was actually 22,
It was
uh,
22. Yep.
22 person Democratic race.
It was the best and the brightest.
Well, it was something. I was an avid Warren fan, and I everyone knows that. But I'm easily going to back Joe Biden now, not because I have to, because I seriously want to, and that's one thing a lot of people are confusing. Oh, now you have to back him. No, it's not that I have to back him. I have to vote for him because we just can't do 4 more years of what we have right now. I'm personally choosing to back him. I'm personally choosing to donate to his campaign. I'm personally choosing to make calls on his behalf because I see a vision where I can thrive in a government that he runs. I see a position where I can thrive in a society in which he becomes president.
So at some point, Trump and Trumpism and all of this will be gone. And is your gut feeling here is the future of the Democratic Party Alexandria Ocasio Cortez's of the world, or is it the Pete Buttigieg's of the world? Because I don't think they can
Great
coexist. I don't
question.
think it can be both.
So here's where I think you're absolutely wrong, and I've told you this for years. I honestly think there's a coexisting of young, moderate Democrats who live in mid country, in the middle of the country, and coastal Democrats who live in like the Northeast and the West Coast. We're talking like your LAs, your New York Cities, your big urban developments, like Chicago and, well, Chicago's not really coastal, but like talking like Texas and a lot of those, coastal states. Um, I think a Pete Buttigieg and an AOC can live and work very well together because they balance each other out and they find happy mediums with each other. Look at the Senate. Look at what Elizabeth Warren is doing with numerous members of her party, of our party. Look at what she is accomplishing. She has accomplished so much in her career as a senator, and she's done it with moderate Democrats. Look at what she did to, break up the big banks. And she did that with Obama. And let's
Okay,
be
okay,
very
hang,
clear.
hang on,
Oh,
hang on. Wait. I got to stop you there
uh-oh.
because the effort was admirable, and Barney Frank was a big part of that. Elizabeth Warren was a big part of that. A lot of Democrats had their hands on that after '08.
Absolutely.
The reality is, I can't extol the virtues of what's been accomplished when nothing has been accomplished. The big banks are running amok completely unchecked. There are no constraints on them anymore. Most of those bills have died or withered. And obviously part of that is the current administration.
Absolutely.
But Democrats who, I'm sorry, you guys make your money off the banks. Nobody has raised alarm bells about that. I mean, I'm sure you will when it comes back to bite us. But the banks have run amok, and nothing has actually been accomplished in the long run. Isn't that fair? I mean, aren't we right back to where we were prior to
I don't
08?
necessarily blame I don't necessarily blame the Democrats for that. I think we've seen a lot of rollbacks on very principled and vital legislation that, happened under the Obama era or the Obama administration, and it's been completely rolled back by the Trump administration. And that's because that's what Donald Trump promised his billionaire cohorts, his billionaire colleagues and friends.
Well,
And
I guess my point is, don't the Democrats have billionaire cohorts as well? I mean,
everyone has cohorts.
the Republicans make their money off corporate. The Democrats make their money off banks and insurance. Isn't that fair?
I would not argue the fact that everyone has the
And look,
time to pay.
in fairness,
gets
Jovan, in fairness, I'm not a purist. I don't think anyone should turn down money.
Absolutely.
But you can certainly, if you give money, that's on you. And,
yes.
I wouldn't turn down money.
But you also have to remember,
I don't think that's a recipe for success.
You also have to remember, well, Democrats are doing that, actually. A lot of Democrats are doing that.
I don't think that's
a lot of
I don't think
Democrats
that's a recipe
refuse to take
success.
corporate PAC money.
Look, you
can't
win unless you spend.
Well, that's not true, and we've seen that. Going back to AOC, she refused to take corporate PAC money.
Right, but that was a tiny. I mean, you're talking about congressional districts. I'm talking about national.
There are
elections.
Dan, I'm telling you, I've seen this in state senates. I've seen this in county legislators races. I've run state senate races and state assembly races where my candidate refused to take PAC money. And it was all generally small donors. And honestly, it does not. Here's the thing. There's a bigger power than money. And if you can hold it, and if you can grab it, and you can keep a grasp on it, you will succeed in an election. And the only thing bigger than money is people.
But, all right, I mean, hang in. This is my next big question, so you kind of ran right into it. So hang with me for a second here. I'm looking at the decade between 2008 and 2018, just prior to the blue wave, because obviously there were extenuating circumstances in the blue wave. You had Donald Trump was a gift to the party. But in looking at that decade, when you started in 2008, the Democrats had 257 seats in the House to the Republicans 178. In the decade that followed, the Republicans had 235, the Democrats were under 200. The Democrats controlled the majority of the state legislatures in 2008, not so in 2018. They controlled 28 governor's mansions in 2008. The Republicans controlled 33 in 2018. What the hell happened? I mean, these are like this is like Carter numbers, or like 1920s and 30s. What has happened here? Because people are fleeing this party, it seems. You talk about the people's vote. Where is it? Because you guys have suffered loss after loss after loss, and much to all of our detriment. What's happening here? Because this is across the board. This is state houses. This is governor mansions. This is Congress. What the hell happened?
So, to be fair, I think that there's a normal shift in party. It it for years, and if you go back longer than that decade, has been a there's been a normal shift in how which party runs which area. You know,
Sure. I mean, we saw this,
you
the
saw it under
Republicans
Bush.
after Nixon, and
Yes,
we saw it after Nixon.
you saw it after
But
Bush. You saw it
but
after
in looking at the
Clinton.
numbers, this is huge. I mean, like this loss of power they've experienced is not like anything the Republicans experienced for a long time. This is huge, and
The shift was
what happened?
the shift was unsettling. So I think, to be quite honest with you, and this is the most blunt I think I'll ever get with you, and in answering this question, I think Democrats underestimated their people. I think at one point Democrats made a decision, and under the Obama's first 2 years, we had control over everything, and we did not do enough to show our party was the party of get shit done or get stuff done. I'm sorry for cursing,
That's
but
all right. It's a podcast. It's
also
not radio.
great. So Dan, I'm used to radio, so I have the
Oh
FEC.
yeah.
FEC has my number.
Yep. Yep.
But the Democrats were not the party of get shit done. Had Barack Obama, not Mitch McConnell, excuse me, had Barack
Oh,
Obama, Harry Reid, and um, and Nancy Pelosi in '08 did what Trump is doing now by railroading these freaking destructive bills, but
right.
in our case, it would have been progressive bills. We would have
They
probably
can
not.
still be destructive though.
I will never say that, sir. And
I have to say it's refreshing to hear you say that, because there is a recognition that I've said that. I said they
absolutely,
stagnated
absolutely.
after the election. I've said
We
often,
we did, we
and this
did.
applies to Trump.
There's no argument about that.
This point of view for me applies to Trump, and it applies to Bush, and it applies to Reagan, and everyone in my lifetime. Republicans always seem to get everything they want when they win an election. Democrats never seem to get anything out of it.
Because Democrats wait, and that's my one thing
Y'all,
about
come on!
that's my one thing I hated about the Obama administration. Had we been active, Obama could have easily decided to get Obamacare passed, the Affordable ACA, the Affordable Care Act
well,
passed in
yeah,
the first
but
100
couldn't
days.
he have passed what he ran on, which was a public
Yes,
option?
that's that, which
Because
would have made a
Obamacare,
lot of sense. Obamacare
you know,
changed throughout the years
it's very
because of
difficult to defend
because of
Obamacare.
lobbyists. Listen,
Yeah.
you're talking to a Democrat, an avid Democrat, who will defend Obamacare
Oh, I
in
know.
in where he has to. But I'm going to be real with you for a second. Obamacare was not what we got promised. And you know that, a lot of people know that. The realism of this conversation is that we got what we got because we waited so long. And we wanted to cross every T and dot every I and make sure everything was pristine and perfect. But that time we lost the House. So that vote meant we had to communicate, and we had to use bipartisan efforts to get this bill passed, where Republicans did not want to pass this bill. It's very ironic how Democrats wait to dot every I and cross every T to protect or to serve the American people, but the Republicans, on the other hand, are just
Well,
like,
it
listen,
wasn't the American people they were serving when they were amending Obamacare. I mean, it was the insurance lobby that they were serving.
I don't believe that. I think they were crossing every T and making sure that everyone could live in what they were creating. Um,
Okay.
but the Republicans don't care about that. Republicans are like, this is what's happening. Donald Trump makes a phone call to Mitch McConnell, who makes a phone call to the then um, Paul Ryan, and shit got done. But like that's not the case anymore. But for but if you think about it, Dan, and here's another interesting point to your original question about fluctuation in party leadership. Look at 2018. You know, we're seeing the exact same thing
Without a doubt. Well, we've
change.
seen this. We've seen this in just about every midterm in modern times. There always seems to be
Yes,
this. Americans seem to not like unified government. It would seem.
I think that's a great thing though. At some point, you have to work with the other side. Although I would like to see Democrats be a little more aggressive next time we run all of
Well,
DC.
they seem to always lose their battles, unfortunately. So,
That's because when Democrats want to do things, and this is kind of breaking the fourth wall and kind of letting people in. When Democrats want to do things, we fight amongst ourselves. We agree on something. One of us is still a little bitter about it, so we write an op-ed. you know,
fair
where
enough.
where
Yeah,
where we descend more than we probably should.
fair
We all
enough.
have a little RBG in us, just a little too much RBG in us.
Obviously, there's an electoral map issue,
Yes.
but in general, is the Democratic Party, which used to be a party of working class people, it used to be a party of union people, and what I'm getting at is they have lost the sort of working class white vote in the middle of the country.
Oh, you think so?
I think so. Are they? How do they get those people back? Are they trying to get those people back, or do they think there's some other demographic route to power, which has not yet borne out, I might add.
Okay.
And I want to clarify. I'm not asking about how do you turn a red state blue, because that can be through demographic shift, just more people moving there. I'm talking about how do you get those people back, or are you not interested at all in getting those people back and rather rely on the demographic shifts?
So here's the exciting thing, about the upcoming election in terms of your question. Um, Hillary Clinton, although Hillary Clinton, although yeah, Hillary Clinton in terms of 2016 was there was something about her that other people didn't like, and they did not trust.
Oh, you think?
I'm just being honest with you.
No,
Um,
I know.
and people, whether they could name the reason or not, had a hard time trusting her. Her trust numbers were always fluctuating. Here's the difference between 2016 and in that, kind of go back to 2016, and in that her campaign did not hit every major state they needed to. They kind of forgot Pennsylvania until like the
Wisconsin.
very they kind of forgot Wisconsin. They slightly forgot parts of Michigan. They forgot these kind of four or five major states that they should have won, but due to campaigning harder in no-win states, they took their assumptions and they risked it all with that. And obviously, major reason why she lost. However, I don't think you're going to see that the same with Joe Biden. Joe Biden has this niche, and I account it to be his retail politic game, because there is very few people that can retail politic like Uncle Joe. Now, before you jump out and say it, some of his retail politics can be a little creepy. I'll be the first one to admit. Watching him swear in a couple senators and interact with their families was one of the most awkward, and just it made watching the ceremony just like, what is he like? God, I want to know what he's saying to that person as he whispers in their ear. It's really, really creepy, Uncle Joe. But like at the same time, Uncle Joe has that ability to connect with people on a surreal level.
Well, I'll grant that he is much more likable than Hillary Clinton was, and
And he is, he
yeah,
is. And you couldn't say Auntie Hillary, or you couldn't call her
no.
Aunt Hillary, but you can call Joe Uncle Joe, and he'll love it. And or Papa Joe. That we're getting that one now too. But there's a likability about Joe Biden, like you mentioned, and it's not just within the Democratic Party. He has a likability amongst Republicans. He has a likability amongst independent people. He has a
Look,
likability against with
think
third party individuals. The
I think
man
he,
has.
he gives us the best chance in Pennsylvania. Is what
I
I
absolutely, and that's solely because honestly, Dan, Arizona's going blue this year because of Joe Biden, and I can almost guarantee it
ooh,
because
bold, bold.
absolutely, sir. Absolutely. This is your first radio show. I'm giving you all the tea. Arizona's gonna go blue. Listen, the McCain family, who basically ran everything in Arizona, has already endorsed Joe Biden for president. They are more or less, Meghan McCain, say what you will, but every once in a while, I just want to give her a big hug when she says something progressive on The View, and then normally by commercial break,
Isn't
she
in
ruins it.
fairness, isn't giving people a big hug what gets Joe Biden into trouble all the time?
Absolutely, absolutely. But it's a virtual hug, so it doesn't count. I think Joe Biden
It's
has
a quarantine
it's a
hug.
quarantine hug. I think Joe Biden has that likability, and I think Joe Biden has a likability in places like Arizona, in places like Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and Washington State. I think Joe Biden has a likability because he has worked with everyone. And when I say everyone, I literally mean everyone. The man is old, but
Yes, he is.
with his age, comes with a lot of experience. And I'm not just talking experience in the Democratic Party, because there's a lot of things that I can be mad at Joe Biden for. And we won't get into that. But like that's a whole another episode.
I'm sure the Republicans have done their own opposition
I'm
research.
sure. I'm sure.
You don't have to help.
But like at some point, Joe Biden has worked well with John McCain. Joe Biden has worked well with other prominent leaders in the Republican Party. Joe Biden has worked well with independents. Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, and let's really remember something before your audience says Bernie Sanders is a Democrat. Bernie Sanders just became a damn Democrat. Okay? Okay, Bernie Sanders
Yeah,
became
but you guys
became a Democrat when
but you
Bernie
just
Sanders
told me
was an
that you guys
independent.
just became inclusive.
We are inclusive. We are
Right.
We're absolutely inclusive. But I'm simply saying is Joe Biden had a profound relationship when Bernie was an independent,
But
and
was there no place? There was no place for Bernie in the party, though.
that is not true. That's not true. Bernie had a place the last 4 years when Bernie won re-election, or last 2 years actually, under the new Congress. Um, Bernie has had a leadership position in the Democratic Party on the Senate side. Last 4 years. Last 4 years. Um, no Republican ever offered Bernie a leadership position on the Republican side. This man has sat in the middle.
Not even as a joke, as like a prank.
No, not
It's
in the
almost
middle.
hard to believe.
No one, this man has sat quite literally in the middle as the only independent or one of two independents in in the Senate.
I don't think he sat in the middle so much as he sat in the far left corner of the room.
His ideal sat in the far left corner of the room, but his desk was actually in the middle because he
Right,
did
but
not
I mean,
want
look,
to
Joe,
sit
Joe
on
Lieberman.
both.
Joe Lieberman was an independent too, and they're very different animals, aren't they?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, then to close this out, I'm going to ask you for big predictions
Yeah,
on
hit me.
first what happens in the House.
I think the House gains 10 seats.
Okay.
I think the Democrats gain 10. You know what? I think that's a little overzealous. I'm gonna be a little modest. I think the House Democrats gain at least 5 seats. No, I'm going back to my original. I think we gain 10 and lose 2.
So a net gain of 8
Yes.
is your prediction.
Yeah.
Okay. The Senate.
I think the Senate goes Democratic 51-49.
Bold. And the White House.
I think the White House goes. I think the White House goes blue. I think it returns to the Democrats. I think Joe Biden just merely beats Donald Trump uh in the Electoral College. I think he completely shits on him in the popular vote, and I think for the first time, you know, in 4 years, our country will regain a soul.
Fair enough. Well, thank you again for doing this.
Oh,
Very appreciative
anytime.
that you came on.
You
You're
know,
one of my first guests
we
ever.
really should do this together one day.
We will. This has, if this has legs, this has to be an ongoing thing, and that'll be a lot of fun.
Just think about the interviews we can have with AOC together. I'm praising her and you're shitting on her. It'd be great.
No, thank you. No, thank you. All right. Thank you again, Jovan.
Oh, my pleasure, Dan. You be well. Stay safe. Stay home. Stop the spread. I want to thank Jovan one more time for being here and being such a good sport. Love having him around, and I'm sure he'll be back in the future. Well, the question is now, what am I drinking today? Well, in front of me, I have Basil Hayden. This is a bourbon. You know what? At some point, we'll get into the difference for those who don't know between bourbon, scotch, and all that, but suffice to say, this is a bourbon. This is a fairly lightweight bourbon. It's about 40% alcohol, and this is about the lightest tasting bourbon I've ever had. Now, I do enjoy it. When you first get a whiff of it and when you first taste it, you get some fruit, you get some berries, vanilla in the taste, even a little bit of butter, I'd say. The finish to this it finishes in that it just ends. It just ends, not in a bad way, but you don't get that finish that kind of makes you look at the glass and say, "Why didn't we do this years ago?" But it's good. This is a great sort of gateway bourbon for people who, don't like bourbon. This is very light. It's very palatable. And I'd recommend it for people who are getting into bourbons. I probably wouldn't recommend it for real bourbon drinkers. It comes from the Jim Beam Brewery. Don't hold that against it too much, but it's part of their sort of small batch. That's like Knob Creek and some others. So it's not the most complex alcoholic beverage in the world, but I do enjoy it just to sit down and drink it, get it in, get it out, and you're done. So check it out. It sells for about, it's under $50 a bottle. You can probably get it, maybe high 30s on the internet. I actually buy all my liquor in stores. I don't like buying that stuff online, so you might be able to get it online for cheaper. I don't know. But check it out. It's enjoyable enough. We won't revisit this in the show, of course, but if you've tried it, let me know your thoughts. The email, thedrinkersandthinkers@gmail.com. For the final segment today, I was going to actually talk about something else. In fact, I had something else recorded, but I've put that on hold for the moment because there's something a little more topical and a little more timely, and that is Trump v. Mazars. This is the Supreme Court case that is set to decide whether or not the House of Representatives can subpoena financial documents related to the President of the United States. In this case, Mazars is the accounting firm that holds said records, and in fact, there are other co-defendants named here. Deutsche Bank is one of them that we keep hearing about. So this is about the House of Representatives' ability to subpoena and, more broadly, what are their powers of oversight, what are their powers of investigation. Now, the first thing we have to get out of the way is a tricky one, and that is that the House of Representatives, in fact, the Congress, has no investigatory powers whatsoever granted by the Constitution. All of their ability to investigate and conduct oversight over the executive branch is implied by law and is created by precedent. Now, there's a lot of precedent. In fact, if you go back far enough, the intent of the framers of the Constitution was almost certainly to have the House of Representatives function much akin to the British House of Commons, which did have an investigatory role. James Wilson of Pennsylvania in 1774 called the House of Commons the Grand Inquisitors of the realm. Back then, it was just assumed that the House of Representatives would and could function the same way.
There is legal precedent throughout the years. Chief Justice Warren in 1957 said, quote, "The power of Congress to conduct investigations is inherent in the legislative process. That power is broad." He goes on to say, "It comprehends probes into departments of the federal government to expose corruption, inefficiency, or waste." Now, there's a lot of these precedents. Of course, the big one is United States versus Richard Nixon. We're going to get back to that in a moment. Now, before anything else, I want to clarify my position on Donald Trump and his financial records, and so that my bias is admitted up front. Donald Trump, I believe, is a criminal. There is no doubt in my mind that in the past 7 decades of his life, there is no doubt in my mind he has committed criminal acts. Acts that are not only illegal, but immoral as well, all to advance the cause of Donald Trump. He's surely one of the most venal men I've ever seen. So getting that out of the way, there is a bias there. I'd like to know what's in these financial records. I'd like to use any tool we can use to tear this man down. That's my bias. Now here's my analysis of the situation. Does the House of Representatives have the right to subpoena documents? Absolutely. This one is obvious. Now they're supposed to do it within the frame of legislative action. In other words, they can subpoena things related to laws that they are passing or are considering passing, or in the course of trying to figure out whether they should present certain laws to be passed. Now, in this case, they're doing this under the guise of the question whether or not there should be greater financial scrutiny on a presidential candidate moving forward. Okay. So first of all, if they were to pass such a law right now, it should not apply to Donald Trump retroactively. I find that unfair. I point to the amendment that term-limited presidents of the United States. When they passed it, it did not apply to the sitting president or sitting administration in that term. That way, it seemed a little less political. I would expect the same to be done for any law related to a president's finances, that it not be retroactive to Donald Trump, and therefore he wouldn't have to turn over all sorts of documents, unless, of course, he decided to run for a third term somehow, some way. Fair enough. But when we're talking about this, we have to be honest, and Democrats have to be honest about what this is. This is less about laws about financial scrutiny of presidential candidates, and it is more about, in fact, it is everything about Donald Trump. This is an opportunity to see things that might illustrate criminal acts or just shady things that he's done that could damage him in the election and damage him politically. And while House Democrats can't outright say that, we all have to acknowledge that's what's going on. And that does frame this in a different light. Now, I did mention before, U.S. v. Nixon is sort of the gold standard for presidential powers and the limits of presidential powers and executive privilege. In the Nixon case, of course, it was about tape recordings and transcripts from the Oval Office that were related to the Watergate break-in and the cover-up that ensued. Now, the court found, quote, "sufficient likelihood that each of the tapes contains conversations relevant to the offenses charged in the indictment," end quote. So this is my first problem with the subpoena of 6 years' worth of tax returns. In U.S. v. Nixon, we knew exactly what investigators were looking for. And in fact, a subpoena often defines the scope of the investigation in general. In this case, the scope is huge. You're asking for tax returns, but we don't know exactly what you're looking for. And almost more damning is that you don't know what you're looking for. The Democrats are hoping there's something in these 6 years of tax returns that will cast aspersion on the president. Now, here's the problem. The court can rule one of 3 ways, really, on this. They could rule in favor of the House, in which case these documents would be turned over, and the Democrats could begin to cull through them. The second possibility, of course, is that they rule against the House of Representatives, which would pretty broadly expand presidential powers. The third, and I think most likely scenario, is that the Supreme Court favors limiting the scope to some degree of what can be done here, in which case that would likely be sent back to the appellate courts. Now, here's the problem. if that happens, while the appellate courts could sift through specifics, and eventually at least some of these documents would be released, that's not going to happen before November. And that's game over for this avenue of the Democrats' offensive here. If they don't get these documents before the election, it becomes rather moot. Because again, this is not about future laws about financial disclosures for presidents. This is about Donald Trump. And we have this opportunity now to defeat Donald Trump in an election. If you don't get this material before November, it's all for naught. But if you love him or hate him, the President of the United States needs to be treated in the same way that I would, or you would, or anyone else would. And that is that law enforcement cannot subpoena vast swaths of my life in the hopes that they find some hitherto unspecified wrongdoing. That's what we call a fishing expedition. That's like the police saying, well, the window was broken when I walked up to the house. And while I understand the urge to take Donald Trump down by any means necessary, there is a larger issue here, and that is that the U.S. system of government has to be strong enough to withstand Donald Trump. It has to be strong enough to recover and rebound when Donald Trump is gone. If it's not, then the system is crap, and we should start over. If we have to bend and break the system to get to a corrupt president, then it really has ceased to function as intended. This is a precedent that will last forever, and every president from here on is going to be subject to this, and I am certain that this is not the last impeachment I'm going to see in my lifetime. It may not even be the last impeachment of this specific president in my lifetime, but I think you're going to see this in administration after administration after administration now. Because if these powers can be broadened to the point where they can look at anything they want at any time, that's troubling to me. It also cripples government. And it also says that if they can do it to the President of the United States, well, they can certainly do it to me, and that's not something I'm comfortable with. And I am not willing to relinquish my right to privacy, not secrecy, but privacy, in service of House Democrats trying to take down a man that has outfoxed them, thwarted them, outstrategized them, outflanked them, and embarrassed them at every turn, from Mueller to impeachment, to government shutdown, to walls. And as much as I'm on board with the cause of taking down Donald Trump, this is not the party that seems equipped enough to do this. And if this fishing endeavor backfires, either these documents don't come out, or they come out and there's nothing in them, it's only going to serve to further illustrate the impotence of the so-called opposition party, which thus far has offered very little in the way of opposition. Now, do I have a solution here? Sort of, but it's all hindsight. In hindsight, the Democrats should have more carefully subpoenaed documents. They needed to know what was in them. And I know that sounds strange. How could you know what's in them before you subpoenaed them? Well, dozens of people have seen these tax returns. It's impossible for there not to be at least dozens of people who have set their eyes on these documents, who know what's in these documents. If those people exist, which they do, the Democrats needed to find them and get a hold of them. Now, there is some line of thinking that they have spoken to some of these people. But those people would know specifics, not 6 years of all your financial records, but, hey, you really need to look into 2005 third quarter. You really need to look into 2007's federal tax return. With more specific information, this would be a much easier sell. Because it seems to me that some conservative justices are teetering here. Even the Trump appointees are teetering on the verge of saying, I'm not sure the president should be able to hide everything. Kavanaugh asks some good questions on this. So did Gorsuch. In fact, the one that doesn't seem to be wavering is, unfortunately, John Roberts. But there are conservative justices in Gorsuch and Kavanaugh that are at least actively asking questions, and I think would be in favor of a more narrow scope. Now, that might happen anyway, but again, the time has run out. So in hindsight, the Democrats should have been much more deft, much more targeted in their execution of this. And there are other cases related to this that I haven't mentioned. The one sort of close to home is Trump versus Vance. This is the New York prosecutor that's investigating the Trump organization. There are prosecutors around the country doing this. There are attorneys general that are looking into this. I don't think that's helpful. And if I were the Democrats, I would call them off, because this brings up another question of, can a sitting president be indicted for a crime? It's a whole other topic for a whole other time, but I believe it complicates the Democrats, House Democrats' ability to make their own case right now, which, again, from the outset, should have been more narrow. It should have been more targeted. There should have been good intel gathered first. And I think that would have helped sway the Supreme Court in this case, because, again, anything short of a majority decision in their favor falls short of what the Democrats need to do right now. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 2. If you made it this far, thanks for hanging in there. I think we came in, about an hour 15 minutes. Don't think of it as going over time. Think of it as bonus content. I'll try harder in the future to keep an eye on the clock, as it were. But thanks for listening. Please feel free to email me at thedrinkersandthinkers@gmail.com, and we can begin to engage. Remember, of course, to think first, drink later. I'll see you guys in episode 3. Thanks so much for listening.